Okay, so here we are. You can see the boat launch and the waves. Well, maybe you can. And what I wanted to talk to you about, it's going to blow your mind, or at least I think. My mother is in her 70s now. I think she's 71 or 72. I guess maybe she just turned 72. And we sat around the campfire, and I was discussing economic strategies, okay? Plausible economic strategies. Because whether we like it or not, each of us is in warfare, economic warfare, as the renowned author Hondo Solomon pointed out in his books, his literature. If you ever get a chance, I recommend again that you get your hands on Hondo Solomon's polygamous papers. It'll blow your mind. It's just amazing stuff. As an economic strategy, economic warfare is basically what that man is pointing to. And yeah, we are in that sort of thing. But I won't elaborate that, and he's better at that sort of thing than I am, at least speaking about it. If I were to write about it, oh my goodness, maybe I will one day, but and I don't know that I would do it any justice, because I'd go off on long tangents and reiterate what I was saying so many times, saying the same thing in so many different words, trying to get my point across, that I think I'd probably write some long-winded narrative that most people wouldn't even touch. But I was discussing how polygamy as an economic strategy was effective, and I was explaining to her, she has a biblical background, so I was explaining to her biblically why God never condemned polygamy, ever, not once in the Bible did God ever condemn it. And I am of a biblical background, and I searched the scriptures to see whether these things were so, and found out that the men, excuse me, it's cold and I have a summer cold still, the men who actually had any real material wealth in the Bible, and actually were blessed of God, prosperous. God blessed them with wives, plural. Even when they, were not wealthy, God blessed them with wives, plural. And then with their wives, they built up empires. Okay? In other words, what I'm saying is you don't have to be a rich man to have more than one wife. Okay? But if you are already not very well off, and you have only one wife, you will never be a rich man. Okay? I don't care. You will never be a rich man. You may think yourself rich, but no, you will not be a rich man. I'm not a rich man. I have one wife. And, if I had 3 wives, I would be a very wealthy man. I probably think I would be a very wealthy man. But anyway, I was getting into all the details. I was explaining, like the blessings of Boaz. All right, you can look those up. Look up the story of Ruth. You look at Jacob, or you look at King David, or you don't have to look at the wealthy ones either. You can look at Gideon. He had 40 sons because he had many wives. Okay, wealthy men in biblical times became wealthy because they actually had an economic strategy. They had wives, and their wives contributed to the success of the entire family unit. The wives did not. They weren't all for themselves, okay? They were building for the family. All right? And so we were talking about that. We were discussing what happened and how the government today operates as this giant pimp daddy who makes these assurances to women and throws them a bone and offers them all this security and such, so they don't have to depend on men, and so that they can be all for themselves and not for the family unit anymore, and not for their husbands anymore necessarily. And basically the government actually owns the progeny, the offspring in the family, their property of the government. And I was explaining how this is all done. And when she finally saw that a man really did have an edge with wives, plural, and that the real beneficiaries really were the women, because they actually got to live in really nice dwellings, and they could actually get out of the slums, and they got to wear nice clothes, and they had their self-esteem, and they lived well. Okay. It took a lot of hours to explain this to her. Why? It's all, they all, put it in the pot, but then they buy a house that most people these days can't even afford. Okay, they all live in the house, but they're living really well. Okay, and anyway, I'm not going to get into, I don't have hours to explain all this. Common sense should make it very clear how that's possible. How in a polygamous situation you can go from rags to riches. Okay? Of course, the government is going to fight you. The government doesn't want you to succeed, okay? And neither do the Joneses, all right? Because they're competing with you too. When you get a bunch of wives in, the women get their rest. They can sleep 8-10 hours sleep a day, because they can work it out between themselves. They don't have to stuff the kids into daycare, because they got a system daycare working for themselves already. And one's taking turns doing this, and the other one's taking turns doing that. And the sister wives or co-wives, or whatever you want to call them, okay, they've got it down. They got a system running smoothly, efficiently. They have house meetings, okay, with the head. That's the husbandman. And they work it out together. And they get it together. And they advance. Well, anyway, I got into all this, answering all her rebuttals in that. And when it finally, you could see, I saw the transformation. I saw the bell in her head go off. The ding, ding, ding. How her grandchildren would be better off in a polygamous setting. That's when she turned to me and she said to me, why did man let this happen? I was talking about monogamy only, right? Why did man let this happen? Now, it's funny. I got to tell you, I've heard this before. I've heard this from many women when the bell goes off in their head, ding, 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 and they realize that they are actually better off in a polygamous situation, economically speaking, right? That they're better off in a polygamous situation, and that bell goes off, they always ask this question. And, it's funny because this time my mother asked this question. My mother wanted to know, why did men let this happen? Well, that's a long story, okay? Men were deceived, and largely because of war, okay? World War I and World War II knocked the wind out of their sails, okay? And this country didn't have a whole lot left in terms of leadership and good men, good God-fearing men. And when they came back, they were demoralized. War really, really kills the morale in you. It hardens you, and it makes you a callous individual. And, after World War I and World War II, they'd seen so much death and everything, they just wanted to, relax. They just wanted a little bit of, a chunk of land and, a place to stay. But you see, they didn't realize that while they were gone fighting the Jerries, okay, while they were, out fighting Mussolini and Japan, they didn't understand that The government had changed the rules. And, many of them returned maybe to farms that, their granddaddy owned, and this is before the First World War, so their granddaddy had allodial rights to property, but the government came along and bought out those rights, eh? That happens later. I know a few farmers where they actually had allodial property. They didn't understand what they were selling out. They didn't understand that they were selling out their allodial rights, which is a totally different deal. All they saw was, hey, I can get some money here, and I could really use it, and for my crops, and I don't care. I'm not going to try to get the oil out of this land, if there even is any oil in this land. Yeah, I'll sign over my allodial rights, but they didn't understand that meant that they didn't really own the land, that all they had was a title to live on the land. Then, of course, yeah, they could pass on to their sons and daughters if they wanted to, but they didn't really own the land anymore. All they owned was the title to the land. Now, when I explained all this to my mom, she was just like freaked right out. She was just like, why did they do this? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Greed. As men, yeah, I have to say, my forefathers blew it. As men, I'm sorry to say, my forefathers really blew it. But there's a little bit more into this too, It's not all the man's fault. And I'm not going to get into a blame game here. Women like the idea of having the right to vote, and they like the suffragette scene. They like the idea of egalitarianism, even though they knew they could never be equal to a man because they're not men. But they didn't care. They wanted it to say on paper that they were equal to men, and that is a lie. Come on. Male does not equal female. Female doesn't equal male. But I don't have all the time in the world to explain this. But I just think it's so funny that in the end, do you see, people? It always falls on the head of the man. And there was something my daughter once said to me, and she's so right. She said, Dad, if what you say is true, in the end, it's always the man's fault. And I said, you know what, daughter? I hate to tell you this, but I have to agree. In the end, it is the man's fault, because he is the head, and he let it happen. See, when Adam stood there and idly let Eve pluck that fruit from the tree, he was with her, by the way. A lot of people don't know that, but he was with her. That's his fault. And then not only that, but after he witnessed her transformation, he decided he was going to eat some of that stuff himself. Instead of violating her right to be equal, and getting in the way between her and that serpent and protecting her like he should have, he followed her lead. He followed her example. Sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? What about boys, young men that grew up in the Second World War, or even the First, but the Second World War, let's say, when their daddies were shot to death, when their fathers died overseas? and there was no male figure in their life. Whatever became of them? Well, I can tell you that crime went up. I can tell you things got pretty bad for a lot of them. I can tell you that homosexuality increased. Why wouldn't it? Mama's the head of the household. You know, why wouldn't it? Now Uncle Bobby can have his way with little Johnny. Why wouldn't it? I'm trying to be polite here, okay? Why wouldn't it? What does war do for people? Huh? What does it really do for people? War. Who benefits? You really have to think about this. I can assure you that nobody benefits more than the warmonger himself. Nobody benefits more than the corporations of the industrial military complex. And nobody benefits more than the banksters who finance the wars. Both sides, same bank. It's a win-win situation for them. Think of it. How did this happen? Well, I would say look to World War I and World War II. Okay? When women got to start stepping into the shoes of their husbands because their husbands are busy out fighting the wars. How did this happen? Well, the devil's in the details. And men need to stop listening to the devil. And men need to start looking at what the good book says. And men need to start treating women right. And men need to stop buying into the lie that you can only have one wife. Men need to man up. Men need to take charge of their economy. And stop letting the devil do it for them. That's all I'm going to say right now, but I was just so, I've heard so many women, when they finally see the light, when they finally realize why God never condemned polygamy, when they finally start to see that women and children are the greatest beneficiaries of a polygamous arrangement, when they finally, put away their emotional garbage and look at this thing strictly, mathematically and logically, rationally. It never fails. They always wind up saying to me, why did men let this happen? It's a good question. But we can sit here and scratch our heads and be stunned by all the overwhelming nonsense that's going on. Or we can take action as men and say, we're not going to take this garbage from you guys anymore. You're not going to tell me how many wives I can have. And you're not going to tell me how many children I can have. I have a right to as many wives as the good Lord gives me. And I have a right to have as many children as the good Lord gives me. But until men pull together and man up and start taking charge of their own nations, instead of sticking their nose in everybody else's business, fighting battles that aren't even their own, I don't expect we're going to see much change. But I'm looking to what's written in the book of Isaiah, chapter 4. And that time is coming, friend, because man won't stop fighting. And the more men that get killed in war, the more women are left behind to fend for themselves. Think about that. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you so much for listening.